Hey folks, Matt Sharp here with another Pacific Angler Friday Fishing Report. We're filming for June 26th, so if it's nowhere near June 26th, click up here. It's a link to all the Friday Fishing Reports, and we do it every week, so I've probably got something more up to date for you. Before I go any further, I'm gonna need this. Why? We asked some hard questions of the Fisheries Minister last week, and she gave us an answer. An answer that absolutely disregards conservation, absolutely disregards science, does an utterly awful job of managing this fishery. Last Friday will go down in history as probably the worst fisheries management decision that's ever faced this industry. And it is something that affects all of us because it is a policy and a direction that this government has taken that will affect your freshwater fisheries, will affect your steelhead and salmon fisheries in the rivers, and is obviously already affecting your saltwater fisheries in a big way. In this week's report, I'm gonna look at what those regulations mean for actually getting out fishing, because we're gonna keep fishing. We're not gonna stop salmon fishing, but there are ways to do it to follow the regulations, and I'm gonna show you how to do that. I'm also gonna touch base with how you guys can get involved. Why? Because there are going to be protests, there are going to be lawsuits, and this year we're not gonna let it stand. Last year, we let it stand, we let it ride, we figured that science would prevail. This year, we're hoping they would repeal some of those regulations that they put in place last year because they had the science and it told them that nothing they did last year did anything to help salmon. They made the regulations harsher. Again, not doing anything to save salmon, but just giving them a scapegoat to hand to the NGOs, the First Nations, and the general public out there of this is what we did to save the salmon, and it was a really hard decision. It was a really stupid decision is what it was, and I don't think anyone in their right mind or conscience can vote for the Liberal government if you love fishing, if you love access to the outdoors, and specifically if you love saltwater salmon fishing for Chinook. Now, I don't want to turn this video into a complete rant, so I do actually have some really good freshwater fishing stuff for you. They did actually announce that a number of the regulations for freshwater salmon fishing have been opened. I'm still scratching my head on a few and I haven't wrapped my head around all of it, but I want to leave a link to that down in the description because there's some changes there to look at that don't look all that bad. Also, on the trout fishing riverfront, this is something we all start looking at this time of year, and for the last 10 years I've had a ton of fun in the written version of the blog doing my outlook for the Skagit, for the Thompson, for the Birkenhead, rivers like that are dramatically affected by snow melt in early July. Now, a number of these fisheries opened July 1, and I'm gonna give you my predictions looking back at the 10 years worth of data of where this is gonna fall into the mix when we look at snowpack levels right now, when we look at water levels right now, so you guys can plan your Skagit trip, your Thompson trip, your Birkenhead trip, which is an amazing fisheries. If you love classic river runs through it style fishing, this is where you're going to be doing it, and I'm gonna go over that in the middle of the report. Also, for you lake guys, I am going to have an update there. I've got some awesome pictures. People keep sending it in. It's great, as well as Zach has a new fly that is looking at a really interesting material that I think is really going to change the chironomid game, but it also might change the nymph game when looking at those streams that we were talking about earlier. Something definitely you want to consider if you're a fly tyer. As always, guys, you want to see more reports like this, please consider hitting the subscribe button, hit that like button. Let's get into her. All right, guys, thanks for tuning in with me this week. Now, I don't want to turn this into a huge political rant. If you guys are not interested in the saltwater fishing, I actually encourage you to be interested because, God forbid, this government tries to manage a fishery that you love the same way they've managed the Chinook fishing out in saltwater. We'd all be in trouble. That said, I know you might want to skip through this political stuff, so down here is a timestamp so you can just scroll through with your finger and skip to the good stuff that interests you. For all you saltwater fishermen, we're going to go over it in detail. Let's take a look at it right now and see what this is going to mean for you moving forward. So when we pull it up, this map was provided, thanks for the guys doing this, because literally you can't decipher the fisheries maps. They just don't make it easy. So this was put together. Big thumbs up to the guys that made it happen. And when you look at it, I guess we can start with the good news, the very, very little good news that there is. But when we look up Howe Sound up above here, there's nothing marked on this map. You guys are gonna see it up here a little bit zoomed in. It's Chinook non-retention until July 31st. And then August 1 to August 31st, 1 Chinook per day, maximum 80 centimeters. Now you're gonna hear this 80 centimeters thrown around a lot, and what the heck is 80 centimeters? Well, I've got my trusty piece of Ganjin cord to show us, and this is 80 centimeters. Again, at least there's some opportunity there to take a fish home, but this length is silly when you look at the breakdown of size of Chinook. Long story short, that's what's available to you guys, but it's not even available to you in the areas around Bowen. You've got to push even farther into the Howe Sound area to make that happen. Now, when we look farther out, we look at Management Unit 29-1, Management 29-2, July 15th to August 31st, they have that 1 Chinook, 80 centimeters per day. Now, rolling it into where we've been utterly smashed, and that is going to be 29.3, pushing up into the Bowen area, which is outside of that area, 29.4, which is basically the entire mouth of the Fraser River, as well as the entire harbor. And again, this makes very, very little sense if they're trying to protect stocks of concern. So that's not a catch and release fishery, that's nothing. Now I'm going to give you the caveat and the way around this in a second. August 1 to August 31st, 1 Chinook per day, maximum 80 centimeters. And sorry, that is Management 28-6, which is a very little area off the North Shore line. All of the red areas, all of the hatched red areas are going to be no Chinook fishing until September 1. And so they're saying that you won't even be able to target Chinook in a catch and release fishery. And I have heard rumors already that they're issuing warnings. Now for those warnings, I want to remind DFO that coho fishing is very similar to Chinook fishing. And if they're going to try to regulate within different species, it's going to be a real challenge for them to make anything stick. And I really encourage you guys to get out and coho fish in all those waters. My favorite depth for coho fishing is going to be 120 feet with a plug, and it should be probably about 6 to 8 inches in plug size to make sure you get the big coho. I'll leave it at that. Now, back to it. After that, they are going to be opening it up after September 1. So you guys should have some good fishing, in the September range. We should be able to retain fish because none of the stocks of concern are anywhere near, remotely near, that time frame when it looks to the migrations. Now, I'm gonna leave it at that. Comments down below if I've missed something, if I've tweaked something. I'm also gonna really encourage you guys to check out in the links below our blog response to this, where it looks in detail at the science, looks in detail at the decision that was made, and really cuts down why it was made. There were some comments last week sort of saying, of course it's because the First Nations have first rights, and of course it's because X, X, and X. I'm aware of all those concerns. It still just blows my mind that any government could be so negligent in their management of a resource that should be for all of us to enjoy. Now, let's get out of the fishery stuff. I'm gonna put back on my fun, drink beer, hang out, talk fishing cap. Let's get into the weather. Let's get into the freshwater fisheries where there's definitely some cool information out there. All right, when we pull up the weather and take a peek at that for you freshwater anglers or you saltwater anglers that are looking at the weather, we're gonna roll over to Vancouver, and it looks as though it will be pretty decent in Vancouver this week with a mix of sun and cloud. And we're getting highs into the low 20s. It's still a little under seasonal averages. When we look at the 14-day trend, you can see that we're sort of smack dab in the middle of it. But next week, we're gonna push up through it a little bit, and it'll be sort of very average for this time of year, which should be good because we've had way below average weather, weird, muggy, rainy stuff. That should be good for all your fisheries, and it also bodes well for some of the fisheries coming down the pipes that I'm gonna talk about in a second. Now, when we roll it out to the Kamloops region, if you guys are lake fishermen, it's still going well. It is getting warm. And so that's gonna mean a lot of bugs. That's gonna mean the bites are gonna be pushed into the morning, into the evening a little bit more. But we're gonna see 29 Thursday tomorrow. I'm filming Wednesday night, of course, and then 27, and then it gets hit on the weekend for you guys again, which is kind of a downer. So it's not going to be beautiful. It's going to be rainy, 19, 20, but then it rolls back up. So when we look at the 14-day trend for Kamloops, you can see it dips down a bit on the highs there, and it's going to hold just a little bit below seasonal averages for the next 14 days. Now, in the long term, that's actually good. That's going to keep the lakes relatively cool. It's going to keep the forests relatively damp, which we don't want forest fires, but it shouldn't make for great fishing this weekend. Mixed bag on the hatches. We've heard of everything from shallow water damsel fishing to sedge hatches to mayfly hatches. So you're going to want to be fully prepared when you head out, and it's still definitely worth getting out there. It could be good for the next handful of weeks, if not more, when we see this sort of slightly below average temperature when it comes to summer. Now, what I wanted to talk to you guys about was the trout fishing. For a lot of you guys, one of my favorite fisheries and a lot of your favorite fisheries are going to be the classic fly fishing trout fisheries that we have that usually kick off in around July. And those fisheries are the Thompson, the Skagit, and the Birkenhead. Every year I sit down, I shake the crystal ball and see what the heck's going on. More importantly, I'm looking at snowpack levels and water levels for previous years, gauging where it was. And this year we've got an interesting one for you guys planning trips. So got some good news on the monitoring front. The Skagit River now has a graph that's a little bit easier to read. They used to have it down at Ross Lake, but Ross Lake was fluctuating so much because of the dam that it really gave no data when it was for us as fishermen. But last June, I think they put this one in, and it's Skagit River above, I can't even pronounce the name of that river / creek that comes into it, but it's right smack dab in the middle of where we like to fish. And when we look at it, you can see that we're quite high. Now, the good news is they kicked this in literally at the end of June last year, so we have data from it, and it's really interesting to see. So when we roll it back, you can see that on the 27th of June last year is when the graph started. So that's a perfect time to gauge opening day, which is July 1 for this year. And you can see that it was a 5.61 meters on the graph. Roll it over to today as I'm filming, and we're sitting at a 6.1 meters on the graph, noticeably higher. And when I've been looking at the snowpack numbers, when I've been looking at the numbers of the Thompson and looking at numbers of the Birkenhead, all of them are mirroring similar numbers when it comes to being roughly half a meter to all the way up to a meter above where it was last year. Now, what was last year like? I was out on opening day last year and it was high. It was darn fishable, but you were really limited to your access points when it came to the Thompson, when it came to the Skagit. Now, the fishing was good, but one of the keys with all of these fisheries is covering a bunch of ground, putting your flies in a bunch of different water and a bunch of different fish to be able to put together a 5, 10, 15, 20 fish day. And it's gonna be a challenge on opening day this year to do that. So I want you guys to keep that in mind if you're thinking about a July 1 trip up the Skagit or trip out to the Thompson. I'm gonna drag my heels a bit. I'm gonna do some stuff at the back end of July, maybe push into August, and I think that's a good bet if you guys are planning a trip. Now, if you've already booked a trip, the silver bullet is if you can have a boat, if you can do some drifting, if you can get up from the mouth of Ross Lake, there can be some really cool fishing in there, accessible only by boat, and then you aren't constricted by the access issues with trails and being able to cross the river or walk the banks. So take that into consideration. You're going up there. I still expect it to be excellent for you. Just be limited, not the classic hike up a cool mountain stream. Okay, now on the fly front, Zach has a fun one for us this week, and it was one that has a new material in it. Now, before I go any further, I failed us miserably at trying to do a really cool chronomid. And I didn't fail at actually making the chronomid, but I found that with my camera equipment, I can't get the details that I'd really like to show you guys when showing you guys that gill and that half back and the double or triple ribs that you might want to put into a really realistic chronomid. Now, Zach has a $4,000 camera, so he's taken over from me. He says, I'm gonna pull this off, Matt, I can do it. But before he did that, he wanted to test it out, and he tested it out on a color that we haven't been talking much about, and that's a lime colored chronomid, which is a really cool one to have in your kit, one that I see all the time, and a lot of people don't have that color in their box. He also uses a material that's really interesting. I think it's game changing. It's come out in the last year or so, but it is a flat wire. And what that does is allows you to get some really cool colors in your ribbing, but it's flat and tight to the body, so it doesn't hump anything up in weird ways. There's a lot you can do with this. We have a huge selection of colors in the shop if you want to come down and play. Zach and I bought way too many of them, but Zach uses that in here. You can see how he's using it, how cool the effect is, and then come on down, check it out. And you probably want to put a few of these guys in the box as well. All right, guys, that's everything I've got for you this week. If you want to see that rant video last week where we asked hard questions of the fisheries minister and she utterly failed in her answers, click up here. If you guys want to see Zach's fly, click down here and check out the blog version of the report because I've got more details on the Skagit and definitely more details on the politics front. As always, you want to see more reports like this, click that like button, hit the subscribe button. We'll catch you next week.